everyone, and welcome back to Sustainability Chats with Friends. I'm so thrilled to be joined by Manini and Avantika today, who work in the biodesign, regeneration, and technology space. And they just also happen to be two of the best, most interesting, most fun people. So I'm so stoked to have you on today. Thank you for joining me. Could you please go ahead and introduce yourself? Maybe Manini, we could start with
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. And thank you so much for having us. We're so excited for this conversation to be here. I'm Manini. I was born and brought up in Singapore, and I'm a biodesigner, researcher, and technologist, and co-founder of BIOPOD.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Avantika. Also, thank you so much, Isabel, for having us. I was born and brought up in India, and then I moved here to study. I studied industrial design. I'm a biodesigner, researcher, strategist, critical futurist, and
Oh.
currently, Vinny and I are both at Harvard doing our design engineering program and also co-founding Biopod and kind of trying to push that forward. So a lot of my work is in the sustainability space.
Amazing. Yeah. And so that's how we know each other through Biopod because we were all in the Terra Carta Design Lab competition
Yeah,
together, which I think now was 2 years ago, right? It was 2024.
Yeah.
in a minute.
Yeah.
Crazy. I mean, it was such a cool experience. Basically, it was a competition founded by King Charles, and his organization, the Sustainable Markets
hmm
Initiative. And then we happened to find ourselves in the shortlisted finals. So we got to go to New York for Climate Week and pitch there, which was amazing and so fun. And then you went on to win it. And so I want to hear everything because we haven't really caught up since
Yeah.
then. So, like, how did it go? What was the process like? Did you get to meet the king? Like, how has it been going since then?
Okay, I can take this one.
You
Yes,
should
we
take
did
this
get to
one.
meet the king. Um,
You did or
we
you
did, we
didn't?
did, we did. Um,
Oh,
but
amazing.
I
What's
don't
that
want to lead
like?
with that because
Okay,
but
that's
essentially like so Manini and I had been working on Biopod for like a year, I think, before we decided
yeah.
to apply to Terra Carta. It was funded through another sort of
Oh,
RISD grant called the Summerson Sustainability Innovation Fund. And that's how the project kind of came to be.
Yeah.
And when we were looking to like scale it beyond, you know how like things are a project in school and you want to kind of scale it beyond, Terra Carta with the
mhm.
programming that they gave us, you know, and kind of trying to push us to think about like the business case and the scalability of the ideas that we have. And I really appreciated how our team, we got a few new members on our team for Terra Carta to help us kind of conceptualize like what does this sort of nature-based technology look like all over the world? Like how can we actually scale this beyond just like a project that we're doing in school? And so the guidance and the mentorship of the Terra Carta sort of like panels and all of the experts that we had access to and all of kind of the peer review and feedback was extremely helpful in like shaping who we are as a company. Um,
Mm.
when we submitted, I think I can say we were very adamant about not giving too too into what people expected of a business and wanted to stay within our kind of, I would say, fairly idealistic framing of what we want, you know, sustainable technology to be in like a in the most optimistic sense and how we wanted to empower communities. And we put that front and center and we were kind of like, I hope this makes sense. And then, you know, it was like, you know, off into the void as you know. And yeah, and then the rest is history. I mean, maybe I'll let you talk about like the aftermath once we like found out we were like in prov wash. I think Manini was like trying to
Everybody
get to
was like
RISD.
running from the train because I was working at a lab in Boston at the time and we had these like weekly meetings and we were running late and so like I was like running from the train and I think it was the like lead it was like one of the leaders in research at RISU was like announcing
Sarah
and
Cunningham,
how
yeah, yeah. She was the
and,
provost
like,
and she was announcing. I was like, Manini, where are you? They're about to announce the winners. Like, we need to be here.
and
And
it
my
was
sister was there.
fantastic. It was really
Yeah.
interesting because I think for me at least being a creative, I never really saw myself co-founding a business. And then when we were sort of doing this, we were trying to think about, none of these business models that we're really used to seeing out in the world fit into the like cookie cutter of like what we're trying to do. And so a lot of being
Mm.
creative in business is sort of also being flexible and sort of like seeing how we can sort of mold this structure. And that was something that I think Terra Carta really just helped us see, that we can be creative not only in design but also in other fields, and sort of like mold ways of doing and ways of thinking in those
Yeah,
spaces.
exactly.
So that was something that was amazing, and that's something that we're like continuing to do, and we're sort of joined by an amazing team that we're able to have because of this competition. And there's 6 of us, and we're all around the world, from like Texas to India to people even working in Singapore. And it's been just so amazing to also learn from all of these
Yeah,
people.
exactly.
That sounds amazing. I'd love to hear more about the business model that you're building out, and also just to give people kind of a rundown on what Biopod
Oh yeah.
is.
Maybe Avantika, you have like the pitch down, so I'm gonna
Oh
let you.
yes, yesterday we were at we were giving the pitch. Okay. So Biopod, we're a company that creates sort of modular ecosystems that are 100% nature-based. So they're made up of mycelium, which is a root system of fungi and native plants. And currently we're focusing on wetlands. And what we do is we want to basically democratize wetland restoration and ecosystem restoration in general. So through the creation of these modular infrastructures, we're really trying to empower communities to engage in the restoration of their waterways that have been polluted. And the reason that we're focusing on wetland ecology is because wetland ecology is really, really good at sort of detoxifying their environment. So they're almost like dubbed the kidneys of the earth, because they have these like metabolic processes, the microbiomes, and the plants that help us, accumulate and like break down all of these like toxic things in our environment. And they're actually like pretty endangered in terms of like ecosystems on this planet. So just a couple of stats. They occupy only 6% of the Earth's sort of land surface, but they contribute to supporting 40% of global biodiversity, and they store 30% of all land-based carbon. So these
Wow.
ecosystems are incredibly productive and are often disappearing. Like they disappear 3 times faster than terrestrial forests, because a lot of the time the land near the water is, industrialized or developed or cleared out, or it is a dumping ground. So this sort of ecology is disappearing at a much faster rate than, what we usually think about as like terrestrial ecosystems. But they are this interesting in between a terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem, which is what makes them
Mm.
amazing and fascinating, and which is why we are working to kind of democratize their restoration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess the thing we
Amazing.
always get is like, oh, so you guys are like landscape architects, so you just go into the landscape and like, you rewild. And I think something that we very
Mm.
consciously did, also being trained in industrial design, is sort of like take this big ecosystem, that spans like miles, and condense it down into something that can be super modular. And so something that we really love doing is seeing how people interact with complex science being packaged in this miniature way. And we love to
Right.
see it as the product, but then we also love to like zoom out and sort of see what is the system that surrounds, this thing that we've designed. And so something that we've been rallying with is this idea of like a living infrastructure system. And we think about ways that we can locally source these materials, whether it's the fungi or the plants. Are we teaming up with nurseries or universities that are doing tissue culture, or are we sort of looking at spaces where they have like libraries of fungi, and how we can sort of learn from what they've sort of archived, and then sort of
Right.
co-create these systems, and they're sort of built and then put into the water or ecosystems where they're sort of needed. And we study their lifespan. And then something that we're sort of actively also doing is, what are they doing while they're out there? And how can we sort of optimize? Is it something that is sort of floating in the water forever, and then it sort of like eventually starts to build back up fringe marshes? Or is it something that we're, removing and studying and trying to like separate the stuff that they're catching? I mean, we've seen just from our first pilot that we're able to catch some microplastics, we're seeing some heavy metal accumulation. And so we're like studying the system that has been in place for so long, but trying to understand from like a Western science perspective and a way to numerically quantify how this would behave in ecologies all around the world.
Yeah. And
Right.
yeah, go ahead, Isabel, if you had a follow-up question to that.
I was just going to say that sounds amazing. And it sounds to me like you're using plants to naturally capture these microplastics, right? It's not like you have a net that's like deployed underneath or anything.
No,
Yeah,
no.
So
we like to
Yeah,
can you tell
like
me about how that
yes,
works?
I can. So the biopod is, if you can imagine it, 100% living nature-based solution. Essentially, the bottom, so basically the thing that makes it float isn't plastic. It isn't metal. It doesn't have any additional components. It's just the mycocomposite. So what that means is that there's just agricultural waste that has been woven together by the mycelial network. So it was grown essentially like the little buoyant pod that's around 18 inches by 18 inches big, is grown. And we usually have workshops where we teach people how to grow pods, or we are
Oh,
kind of like
cool.
growing ourselves. There's a whole other part we will get into it. But essentially, like
Yeah.
we make this buoyant mycelium mat, and then in this mycelium mat, we plant these plants with their soil sort of structure. And what we notice is that these plants really like growing through the mycelium. And once they grow through the
Mm.
mycelium, their root systems are sort of dangling in the water and sucking up. As they suck up water, they take in a lot of these metal components like with the water, and they store it in their leaves. And there are certain plants that are hypoaccumulators that are really, really good at doing this. So this whole process of plants accumulating sort of matter is termed as like phytoremediation. And the mycelium, they work a bit differently. They have almost like enzymes like we have in our stomachs that they secrete outside of their bodies that help them break down, let's say, things like long chain hydrocarbons and things like, basically like petroleum based compounds that are all like linked together, and then the enzymes go and cut it up, and in the end it's like just carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen that the fungi can kind of metabolize. And then we do have like an anchoring system to keep it all in place, but the anchoring system is made out of jute or other natural fibers. So we want to make sure that we're not actively leaching contaminants while we're trying to remediate the contaminants. And so we're creating like that's what Manini was referring to as like a living infrastructure, because there are, yes, so many advantages to having sort of hardscaping, but there's also really amazing benefits to just having like the soft infrastructure that kind of sits beside your cityscape and is giving you all of the benefits of the biodiversity that would and should be there. And also, if you let it sort of degrade in place, um, it might reseed and repropagate a wetland. So that's also what we're thinking a lot about, is like the life cycle of the biopod, and there's multiple end of life situations.
Yeah, it sounds like there might be some pros and cons. Like if it's accumulating all of these kind of contaminants, what then happens if it does just get released? Do they then also get released, or do they kind of get detoxified, I guess, by the plant so it doesn't actually matter?
That's a
yeah,
great
I guess
question.
overall, like we like to think of them sort of doing like sort of like when you put a sponge into water, to like catch all
Hmm.
of these things. So they have like this ability that, over time they would be sort of super saturated. But the beauty of
Mm.
working like and co-creating with like all these multi-species systems within this one pod is that it's not only a sponge, it's also sort of doing this metabolizing and sort of breaking this stuff down. And so the stuff that is caught up by the sponge are stuff like metal that can be broken down any further. And so in that instance, we would sort of like always be doing water testing and also be testing the cores of the pods themselves to know when they're super saturated. And then we'd sort of make that decision to take them out. And this is something that, we work into the site plan. So usually we would be like, okay, like we'll put them in for this much amount of time, and because of the surface area to volume ratio, we sort of know that over time it would sort of accumulate this amount, and we can sort of plan for those removals. But Avantika,
Okay,
you were
cool.
going to say something about the plants, or
No, I think that's like perfectly, but I feel like there's three cases. There's one where it's like there's toxic metals that, lead is lead, and lead can't be
it
anything
can't
less
break
than lead
down.
when it's in the environment. So the best we can do with lead is like suck it up and make sure that it's not floating in the water. Once, and so it really comes, and so that, and then once it's saturated, as Manini said, once the sponge is sort of saturated, we would take it out and like process that. And there's ways to re-extract the lead from biomass, which we're looking
Mm.
into, but haven't kind of, there's like industries that do that. So we're thinking about like where is it a symbiotic kind of like, hey, we hand this to you for you to process, and when is it something that we take into ourselves, and that differs from place to place. The second situation is if it's just like things like petroleum-based compounds or nitrates and phosphates and other stormwater compounds that are, that can be metabolized, as Manini said, by the fungi and the plants themselves and the bacteria that live in these sort of microbiomes within the biopod. So there's lots that can be then broken down into just carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, phosphorus that can then be utilized by the plant to, live. That way the biopod system is then just like limited by its ability to, stay together because it is completely like a biomaterial system. And then the last case is that if everything is great and we have like an embankment of soil that has been kind of arid and or like there's no plant life and we want to kind of rewild that sort of embankment, the biopods can kind of act as those seeds. And as they slowly degrade at the end of their lifespan, instead of taking them out and composting them, we can just let them be and let them kickstart that ecology. So there's like a couple of different sort of options. And as Manini said, that's completely based on like we take each site for its merits from like the pollutant standpoint, but also from like what is the end of life, what is the supply chain around it. So it's a really interesting sort of problem. But once we kind of like have our models, I think we're getting better at identifying like, okay, we don't need to redo all of the work. This is how we can tweak the system. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, when you just said that, when you sort of put them as seeds, I was thinking about like something that we were really thinking about with this product was like, oh, like we could just plant all of these plants individually, or we could like kickstart entire ecosystems. And so it's like this thing that I think like a lot of the times when we think about rewilding, we're like, okay, let's go plant trees. And with us, we're really interested in sort of can we sort of create this system that's going to kickstart an ecosystem in a way that we know that these are species that already play well together or like symbiotic, and so maybe if we do bring them all together they're going to be more resilient and sort of be a bit more likely to sort of kickstart their rewilding and their remediation there as well.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, and I'd love to ask you more about that, but it suddenly occurred to me, could we possibly pause for a second and go over definitions just briefly for those maybe who
Oh,
are listening and don't know? So you've mentioned a few. There's been biomaterials, there's been remediation. What else do we have? I guess regeneration as well is quite a big one. Um, so could you please maybe start with those three?
yeah.
So I think biomaterials in like the medical space has like, a very established definition of stuff that just goes into your body and like helps you in that way. But I think when Avantika and I and a lot of the biodesign community talk about biomaterials, we're talking about bio-based materials. And so it could be anything
Mhm.
that is sort of co-produced with the biological system, or it is something that can feed out from like agro waste. So for example, when we're making the mycelium boats or like the floating mycelium substrates, we are putting in some agro waste and then putting in some spawn, and then sort of that is the bio-based system that we're working with. So it's like 100% biology and came from biological sources and can return
Yeah.
in that way back into biological ecosystems. Um, and regeneration. Do you want to do regeneration?
I think I'm going to do remediation
Yeah,
first.
that's
So the remediation can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people.
mm,
The remediation that we are focused on is bioremediation, and bioremediation is a process by which um, sort of living organisms, through their metabolisms, which is like through their bodily functions, actively help detoxify their environments. So imagine if we as humans could like breathe and clean air, you know? There's certain organisms like fungi that do that. So fungi are like basically nature's decomposers, and they're really good at breaking and detoxifying things and kind of like breaking stuff down. And so bioremediation can happen through multiple different strategies. So the phytoremediation component, plants don't have the same capabilities in their sort of their metabolism. So what they do is they're really good at accumulating. So they just accumulate these compounds. So they make it unavailable to the rest of the world, and they're kind of like storing that. And fungi because they have all of these enzymes that, and bacteria also that have these enzymes that they can secrete outside of their body that do kind of like, the term is extracellular digestion, but it's essentially like they have external stomachs and they just digest the stuff that's around them in the space that's around them. And so that in that way, they're making something that was harmful less harmful by like basically breaking it down through the enzymes that they're secreting. And enzymes are like kind of like, you can think about them as like the things that make digest your food in your stomach.
Right. Amazing. Thank you. And then I guess the last one is regeneration. If you feel like it.
Regeneration, I think I'm gonna take a stab at it because it's a huge word. I feel like regenerative technology,
It is.
regeneration, the regeneration of limbs, there's a lot of components, but the way we look at it at BioPod is that there's always, I think it implies a certain level of care and a certain level of, remaking a system, but not just like fixing, but really thinking about the interconnections of the ecology, really thinking about the relationships between. So we think a lot actually about the relationships between the human being stewarding these projects and the ecology themselves, and like how are we even healing that relationship between the person and their kind of environment, and then how is the environment, the artifact that we're putting, kind of positively contributing to all of the interactions that it has with like other sort of like birds and bees and things like that. So we're just trying to minimize any negative interactions and just maximize the positive outcomes through this sort of like acceptance that everything is interconnected, and then we're trying to kind of heal. So I would say like one word definition of regeneration is like healing, I guess.
Yeah.
Like an
I
approach
like
to
that a lot.
problem solving that is like centered around care and healing.
Yeah, I guess like when I was entering this space, I sort of thought about it a lot of like when you break a bone, you don't just get a replacement bone. I mean, sometimes these days you do, although most times you would get a cast that would sort of like guide you toward,
Mm.
healing. And a lot of what is happening there is that there's people who really deeply understand the system and what is in play, and they're able to support that in a way that sort of generates flourishing or better health or whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that analogy a lot. And so I loved what you were saying before we took that break. I mean, thank you for going into those definitions, but about the different plants, because my project that I did for the Terra Carta competition foundation thing, I can't remember what it's called,
Design.
Design
Yes.
Lab, Terra Carta Design Lab,
Yes.
was a regenerative project as well.
Yes.
And so I was spending a lot of time thinking about, what plants can we plant to sequester the most carbon? That was kind of my take on it, and like how can we rebuild the native ecosystem wherever we may be in the world. And at the time I was focusing on the northeast of the US. And so I found that woody shrubs were really good. Like if you plant, it was something like 16 different species of plants, but mainly woody shrubs, you can sequester 160% more carbon, which is incredible
Yeah.
and insane. And so it sounds to me like you may be researching plants that absorb more contaminants. Is that right? Or are you also trying to get those like keystone species as well to kind of rebuild
Yeah.
these ecosystems?
Yeah. Yeah. The answer is both. I think the the really interesting part and why Biopod is always like an exciting project is because Biopod looks so different wherever we take it. So right now we're reckoning with like ecologies in Rhode Island, but also ecologies in Goa in India, and they're vastly different in
Wow.
in terms of like the species that we get to research, but also the we always have to kind of have like some design guidelines when we start out like the biopod sort of like project for that location, because we can optimize for plants that are really good at sucking up one pollutant, or we can optimize for plants that might help kickstart that wetland ecosystem, because our
Mm.
mission is almost like both the rewilding but also the remediation.
Mhm.
And so the
Mhm.
rewilding component doesn't necessarily necessitate us to like have only the lead absorbing species. It does kind of
Right.
necessitate us to think about a little bit more about the in interrelationships between the species and what each species is bringing to the table. But there's also an interplay between what species we're choosing and what contaminants are in that sort of ecosystem, and how can we balance that. And maybe one pod will be planted a bit differently from the pod adjacent to it, because if you can imagine the pods as like a network, almost like a tessellation, it forms like a giant, it's like a Lego It's like you can form something larger than just the module. And so we can not only tune it on like a pod level, but tune it at like a landscape level of like maybe certain parts have X plants, and then certain parts have Y.
Yeah, I think
That's super interesting.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Please.
I think for
Yeah.
me, like coming in from like computation, I sort of started to see all of these things as like parametric, things that you can sort of like tune, like little knobs that you turn. There might be sites where, as Avantika was saying, we want to focus a lot more on lead. There might be some where they're like algal blooms, and those are completely different problem
Mm.
spaces. But in designing something that doesn't exist as like, oh, here's a pod, and you sort of put it together with a manual, and this is the standard, procedure, you're able to sort of tune it to be more resilient across a variety of different ecosystems and a variety of different landscapes, but also for the specific ecologies that sort of exist within those locations. And so something that we're sort of reckoning with is building a system where you can drop a pin in locations in the world where it would be like the most important, and you're able to have some sort of intelligence within our consultancy and our team that's able to sort of prescribe maybe 5 to 20 different species that might be, stuff that we should consider, and all their different roles. I mean, in essence, we always think, when we do build things, we're like, here's the problem, here's the solution. And lately what we've really been focused on is like, here's the system that might give you like, sure, you might come in with like, oh, it's super polluted, but the outputs that you get are the regeneration, the rewilding, the remediation, but also this idea of like community activation, whether that's with local
Mm.
organizations or like other means, to get people to really take charge of their water health. And so we're not only sort of coming into this space where we're researching plants, we're researching animals and how they're sort of going to interact with the system, but also how people can, for lack of a better way to sort of say, like touch grass again and really like remember what it feels like to be out there and to be playing with biology and be in the mud. So there's a bunch of different things, I
Yeah.
guess, they're sort of surrounding this
Mhm.
system.
Yeah, that is really cool. How are you kind of seeing it playing out at the moment? Is there kind of one avenue? Because earlier you mentioned that there are quite a few different avenues that you could go down. Are you seeing like one demand in one place more than the others?
I think that the way that we're currently scaling or looking at scale is through we're trying to proof our kind of like this business, like this filamentous business model of having what Manini was describing, like this, like we're building intelligence around ecology and like how we can, as like a group of people that can't be everywhere all at once, build some level of knowledge that hopefully we can share with the world, but like some level of knowledge around like what plants exist where, what are the conditions. So getting different data layers together. But
Mhm.
data is one part of it. You can never kind of
Mhm.
understand the complete nuance of a system if you don't approach the community of the system. So the other part of Biopod's sort of business model and the way that we scale is through this like node-based model. And so a biopod node is essentially like a hotspot of like people that are community leaders that are really passionate about this work, organizations that are willing to like, be partners with us in the understanding of like what is the context, understanding of what is the legislation, what is the policy in India versus Rhode Island, what is the even the feedstock, like the agricultural waste available for us to work with, and kind of helping us do this endeavor in a way that makes hyperlocal sense. And I guess
Mm.
the biggest part of that is like a huge part of what we're doing is also facilitating this knowledge and capacity building through what we're calling a citizen science lens, but essentially like we need to build the capacity in the communities to build this technology out, because our whole kind of ethos is to democratize this type of restoration. And so usually when it's done, it's like done by governments or done by organizations from top down, and it's like slow and expensive. And so we're seeing like how can we be a bit more agile with it, and how can we empower communities, obviously while still, having standards and making sure that, there's a lot of accountability in the way we make these things and the way we put them out and the way that we care for them. And so building systems around that and investing a lot in training and workshops. But that's a huge part of like the way that we're looking for this technology to get out there is through the community itself. And well, we've been really lucky that we found like community members from like our that have found us through our website or through workshops that Manini and I have done all over the place, and are just like, hey, I want to do this in my neighborhood. How can I get started? And like when you have that person, it's like they're so willing to kind of go and figure out like what is their supply chain. And we then our job is to kind of like support and facilitate and make as many connections as possible, while also, being very cognizant of the fact that we are, sharing this innovation and we are co-producing the innovation, but we also want to make sure that there's like um some level of accountability if Biopod is also going to do things. So there's like a lot of training and a lot of sort of onboarding that goes into these types of things. But yeah, we're really excited about that model of scaling. Manini, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this too, because like central.
No, basically I think it's just this idea of being as filamentous as the mycelium that we're growing. Like we don't really know, we sort of like grow these things, we don't really know how they're gonna grow, they're gonna have a mind of their own, and that's sort of like what we're sort of seeing happen in the business as well in a really beautiful way, where, as Avantika was saying, these people do approach us and they have a sort of energy of their own, and it's just so unique to each place that we're sort of being able to expand into. And so it's been a real gift also to learn from node leaders and from all of these people who have supply chains and then have maybe waste streams that have never really been thought about being useful um, in the
Yeah.
remediation space. And so yeah, it's just been a real gift to sort of grow in this way as opposed to have, I guess, HQs all around the world and sort of have like, Avantika and I traveling all the time. We're able to sort of be everywhere all at once, but also be nowhere at the same time. So it's been interesting.
Yeah. And like for the demand, I think maybe your question also had like a where are you finding like the most traction in this space? Um, that is like an ongoing biggest sort of business sustainability question for us. And we have, people on our business strategy team that are just like thinking about like what are all of the possible places in which we can imagine biopod being. And obviously like in certain places this sort of community model works really well. In certain places you might have to, let's say in industry or like chemical factories that know they're doing a lot of pollution and have to meet certain standards, like there could be a way in which we sort of like start approaching those sort of like larger organizations and have and which we're actually hopefully going to do soon, but yeah, and have them see the value in what we are providing as this sort of
Yeah.
like way to mitigate some of their impact on their own environment, because they are held responsible in most places, like according to the law, and they have to kind of like keep everything in check. So biopods are really amazing systems for making that type of stuff happen. And I think there's like a win-win-win situation for everybody, especially in industry. Governments are always looking for the urban waterways to get depolluted. Like I know India has like a lot of problems with like the river pollution and fresh water. So yeah, there's no dearth of people. It's just kind of like because it's such a big problem and our solution is so modular, like it can conform to an urban fabric because it's, it can kind of like go across a pier. It has like you can put it in rural places. We're exploring things in agriculture. There's like a lot of different verticals, and now our team is kind of trying to figure out like where would be a great place to land. But a lot of it is also being dictated by the interest we're getting from our community leaders and like where they have the capacity to make that change.
Yeah, and I think from a customer level, the key turning point has been like this moment of relearning, of like just being like, here are systems that have existed on our planet for like billions of years, right? And they do this so well.
Yeah.
Maybe we should not be just popping a tablet into our waterways or sort of putting something in there that is so electricity intensive. Here are these beautiful like systems that are doing this already. And so like a fundamental switch that we see when we do approach people is biology can do this, and it's like a wow, like it's a little light bulb. And I think
Mm-hmm.
like Monica and I are always like at these workshops and like tabling at events, and we say this thing, and I feel like the most rewarding thing that sort of kickstarts change is sort of that moment of transition where they're sort of like, oh, there are other ways than what we see out there conventionally to
Yeah.
have to shift. And that's been fundamental way that we've also been sort of developing methods to sort of disseminate this knowledge, and then after which can come all of the beautiful things that Avantika was saying of like yes, there are chemical plants and, they're sort of having all of these industrial effluents, but they're not really thinking about solutions that might be bringing back ecosystems. And it might be looking completely different morphologically. So,
Yeah. And it's making me think as well. I was speaking to another podcast guest maybe a year
mhm.
ago. And he used to work in the mining industry, and he was saying how usually these regeneration plans take
Yes.
years,
Yeah.
like decades to plan, decades to implement, decades to obviously grow because it's
Mhm.
nature. And it sounds like these are quite quick growing
Mhm.
things. It sounds like you're kind of planting plants that are not only seeds, but are kind of further along in their life. So quicker to implement as well as a
Yeah.
solution,
Yeah,
which I'm guessing would appeal to these bigger companies as well.
absolutely. Go ahead, go ahead.
No, please, please.
What I was gonna say is just like the mycelium, like our sort of turnaround time. Okay, wait, guys. Abstraction. This is the mycelium. This is half size.
You have it.
Yes, I have it. But like this is half scale. Um, so
Okay.
it's like twice this size, maybe a little bit bigger than that. But this is like the model that we're like, you should know that this is made out of mushrooms
Yeah.
and this is how we so essentially like this is the mat that we grow and we plant things in here. Um, but
Can I ask
yeah,
quickly? You then put soil into those
exactly.
holes?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
exactly. So it is essentially a planter, but the mycelium, because it's so porous, it acts as a sponge itself and it does a lot of like adsorption, which is basically like getting particles to stick to it because it has such high surface area. But
Mm.
essentially, like, yeah, these take like around like 2 weeks to grow, into a really
Okay.
robust sort of like material, and we dry them out. And then obviously we do have sort of like a way to kind of like put them into the water, and they do kind of rehydrate themselves. But the like the polymer that mycelium is made out of is naturally hydrophobic, so it naturally wants to repel water. So it doesn't
Oh, that's so
necessarily like
cool.
dissolve in water. It gets
Okay.
wet. It gets wet because it's the same thing that shrimp shells are made out of. So if you
Mm.
imagine like the concept of shrimp, so
I didn't know
mushrooms
that.
and shrimp skeletons are made up of the same thing. So if you can imagine that shrimp can live in
Yeah.
water, you can imagine that this is will be fine in water, but obviously the fact that it has like a lot of like nano level like holes and
Mm.
is porous makes the water kind of enter, and that's what we want because we want the water to enter and we want the water to like all of the particles in the water to stick to the mycelium and just the water to go out.
Mm.
And so it's not necessarily like a water soluble material because a lot of people think about biomaterials and they're like everything
Okay.
is
Yeah.
water soluble, it's just going to fall apart. But no, like shrimps exist, mushrooms are made out of the same material, chitin, that shrimps are made out of. And so we're really leveraging that sort of like intelligence in the materiality to enable this type of creation. And then the mycelium itself is like really accelerating the amount of that sort of sponge effect, if you will. And
Mm-mm.
so I would argue that it does add a lot more than just sort of like planting plants and doing the landscape approach too. And because you have the soil as well, you have all of those microbiomes that are kick-started and then they propagate throughout the mycelium and make the mycelium almost like a second soil or a second skin to inhabit.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. I have done so much research into mycelium and I never knew it was made out of the same stuff as shrimp.
Okay,
I
you know
love that.
that
That is such
today.
like my new fun
Yeah,
fact.
a new
I
fun
love.
fact. Yeah.
But also that's so good to know because one of the questions that I had for you was I would have assumed also that after a period of time it would kind of dissolve. But so how long can it last in water?
So around 5 months. We've
Yeah.
tested it for 2,
Okay.
but there's this beautiful woman, Sue Van Hook, who was the founding mycologist of Ecovative, which is a mycelium company. But essentially, like she has her own company called Mycobuoys that's making like mycelium buoys for places in
Mm.
New England. And those buoys stay out in the ocean for a long time. And when we were speaking to her, like she had tested them for around 5 months. And I'm gonna say this is gonna lead us into a good segue into like the Providence pilot, which is our kind of like new test bed Manini, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear.
Um, so I think the famous picture that everybody sort of sees is like this one where there's like six of them. in the water, and this was sort of our pilot. And through this event, we sort of put 6 of them in the water, and we had a lot of community activation, and we got a lot of interest. So much so that, we were able to sort of get a more permanent permit for these to exist like year round. And so instead of 6, there are going to be 20 of them going in, and it's sort of like a little playground also for BIOPOD to like have an open living laboratory to sort of study what's going on
Mhm.
with the system, but also what happens when we aggregate, like 20 of these, and like what happens when we're sort of like studying them, taking them out, sort of like doing some tests and putting them back in, um, and just sort of doing more of like an open living laboratory where we're sort of doing a lot of
And
this.
seeing how it changed with the seasons, because there's all of these variables, right, Isabel, when you think about this new thing that's a
Yeah.
completely living system, and the fact that, in New England for 6 months, it's like extremely cold and a lot of the plants are kind of dying. So the whole point of this, we do have like, we do know it works and it will be fine in the summer and in the fall, and when the plants are green, it's great. And the good thing about the biopods is, even though they do get, they might, that's going back to the end of life, like the modularity of themselves like allow for like replaceability. So you can just take a pod and compost one pod that if you don't want to leave it to like regrow a wetland, like, and form its own soil, like you can just take it out and compost it, and that should be fine. Or
Right.
or like process it if it's like really toxic stuff like heavy metals. But there's also like an ease of replaceability when you're thinking about maintaining a landscape, right? You don't have to go out with excavators and dig and uproot things. Like, you can just take a pod out and put a pod in, which is like a really interesting space for us. But now we want to like kind of attend to the seasons and see how our system changes in the seasons, and really learn from what does the true maintenance cycle look like when you have 4 seasons. What does it look like in a tropical place like Goa? So there's a lot of you know environmental interaction that we're still quantifying, but the great thing about our system is I feel like there's room to attend to many end of life situations. So even if it is going to degrade in place, it's still providing the value of reintroducing that biodiversity. And I always like to tell people that get too caught up in the remediation component, the first win is that we're bringing back the biodiversity to that location, and that is already doing immense benefit. And it is a plus point that
Ooh,
they are doing these detoxification
yeah.
functions for us. So there is inherent
Right.
value in just rewilding and just bringing back those ecosystems that have been stripped from urban areas, um, or peri-urban areas. And just like that act of rewilding is already providing so much value to the ecosystem around it. As you know, with Future Yard, that's exactly what you were kind of thinking in. And then obviously there's the carbon
Yeah.
sequestration, there's the remediation, there's like the soil building, there's all of these other services.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of like my approach to thinking about the two wins that we're getting.
Yeah. I firmly believe that regeneration and rewilding is the greatest solution that we have to climate change, most sustainability issues. I mean, it addresses like almost all of the planetary boundary issues as
Mm-hmm.
well. Like, I think it's, and kind of speaking to what you were saying earlier, like these systems have been around for billions of years. Like, they're very well
Yeah.
established and very good at doing what they do. And I think we have such a tendency to kind of think like, what's the new cool thing? Like, how can we innovate on this? And it's always like very kind of, to me, it feels like it's quite far reaching. But what I like about this is that you kind of have that appeal of, this is new, this is fun, this is modular. Like, you can get involved, you can kind of like plant a new ecosystem, but at the same time, it's like very much grounded in,
Exactly.
we're wanting to recreate what these plants have naturally been doing for billions of years.
Exactly. And yeah, that's perfectly put.
I mean,
Yeah.
for me, it's a bit unfortunate because it is the fact that this knowledge has to be repackaged and it sort of has to be remarketed and sort of, recatalyzed in this way. It's unfortunate, but I guess this is sort of the bridge that is going to help us, get back to how we were previously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why the thought leadership component becomes so interesting, in terms of like, when Manini and I were like, of course this is obvious, it's amazing. But okay, when we this is kind of going back to Terra Carta a
Yeah.
little bit. Like, last
Do it.
March, the Biopod team was at the Terra Carta roundtables and exhibitions, which happened at Hampton Court Palace, that where the king was in attendance. And basically, like, every CEO and world leader on the Sustainable Markets Initiative sort of like network, I would say, was present. And so I met a lot of really interesting people in charge of, like, just like ESG and sustainability for like huge companies and countries and things. And they were like inspiring panels. But I think what was really great about the Terra Carta panel, and I think what I also picked up from like the talk that BIOPOD gave, was that people were so surprised that this was possible through a natural system, and that it was not as tech enabled as they would have liked to think. And they were kind of like, so it's that easy? And I was like, yeah, it kind of is. Like, you should give out all your money, because because it was almost like somehow everybody who's just like, and you can't like put a value judgment on this, because like they were there to like talk about climate, they were there to talk about how do we save the world from all of the
Exactly.
stuff that's happening, and they wanted to like think about solutions. And I think a huge gap in the conversation was around nature-based technologies, was around like thinking about nature beyond conservation in the traditional sense of preservation, thinking about nature as like this almost collaborator to technology building, and like how we can really leverage these systems and how they actually do work. And it's like a total gap in the understanding that nature can be technology, and it is the most ancient technology. And once that sort of, and all we need to do is just make it easier to do. And the easiest thing is to just go ahead and like get back to like planting things and like taking agency over your yard, Isabel, like like that is also just such an act that we have lost in this whole process of, like, I guess, modern living. There's parts of the world where this is still incredibly front and center of like the way people live on the planet. And those communities all over the world, in India and Mexico, were like huge in like informing the way we were thinking about this. So this idea of like traditional ecological knowledge kind of coming in as like a new way to relearn old things from different places in the world. And we're definitely very much like trying to bring that discourse to the people at the top that are just talking about energy, that are just talking about like renewables, or just talking about things that might just enforce current methods and imaginations around technology. But maybe they don't they don't have the optimism to be like, it can all just be nature. And that's just the most powerful thing. And so they were like stoked. I was like, yeah. And so when we're ready, like I'm hoping that this sort of optimism can be spread by Manini and I through like interactions like this. But yeah.
That is amazing. And that's so cool that you got to meet so many people who are working in kind of high places and they all had that reaction. Did you receive any advice from anyone, or did anything kind of stay with you from that experience?
A lot of stuff stayed with us. And I think like each team member got like their own thing. I think the biggest takeaway for me was this sense of validation. I felt so validated for, sometimes as a young person, you're just like, maybe like, what do I know? I'm trying to do my thing. Maybe I'm too idealistic, but really seeing that there is a gap, that we are seeing things so clearly, and that it is actually like we should be convincing people, because there is so much power in like making that connection, right? So I felt incredibly validated in terms of like Biopod's ethos as a company, in terms of the way that we think about our relationship to the environment and technology. And because all I was hearing was like, oh my God, this is incredible. I didn't know this was possible. And I was like, wait, amazing. But also like knowing that we are like a small company and we have agency over the way that we grow. Certain leaders in companies don't have that agency to mobilize on things that aren't like the status quo or kind of established. So also being really grateful for the agility that we have, that we are not beholden to the architectures that are extremely broken. And that's why Manini and I are investing a lot in like the way that we're building Biopod out, is because like this is the architecture that we will be accountable to in terms of like infrastructure and bureaucracy, which I saw as almost like this handicapped of a lot of these leaders are kind of like trying to mend and build bridges in systems that were designed to not do this type of work, you know? So I was
Mm.
extremely grateful. And then I think I did receive advice of like, just do your thing. Do your
Yes.
thing, make it
Yeah.
happen. And it was a lot of encouragement and a lot of surprisingly at Terra Carta, there was a lot of optimism, not a lot of like cynicism around like that you see in a little bit of like the sort of like business space of like what is your
Yeah.
SOM, SAM, TAM, like, you know, what is
Yeah.
your go-to-market strategy? I think there the leaders were really acknowledging that them as business, like multi-billion dollar companies and having all the money in the world are still lacking a lot of these like impact solutions. And so there is value
Mm.
in trying to spend some time in just figuring out what the most healthy relationship is. And then
Mm.
and obviously like building the business case around is just a huge part of why Manini and I are at Harvard right now. But you know, we're trying to build both of those muscles. But I think it was just like an admission of, you know, we need new imaginations surrounding this type of work. And it was incredibly like I think our panel was attended by a lot of people and people came up to me afterwards and like this work is amazing. Like we didn't think that, you know, this would be like something that would and honestly like wishing us all the best. And I hope that when the time comes that BIOPOD gets to go to these places that we can that we have informed enough and really build credibility and trust to the point where we can, you know, scale and
Yeah.
deploy. Yeah.
Yeah. There's still, I mean, maybe this is sort of steering away from the conversation that we're still having, but there's still like tension though, despite
Mm-hmm.
being this overwhelming, of course, like this should be existing, this should be out there. There's people on the same teams that I guess have a different like language or mechanism that they talk about nature in numbers and in metrics and in carbon
Yes.
and in a very
Right.
unidimensional way, in a
Yeah.
way that the same
Mm-hmm.
people went like the next conversation after yes, this should exist is like, how do we numerically talk about this? What is this gonna do for me? And there's so much interesting tensions in just like being a regenerative collective within the business landscape where we're like, this is not only about what you are getting out of the system, but rather designing for the earth and designing for what it looks like if the fish in your backyard or like, the one that's like swimming and migrating are going to also reap benefits from this. That, if you're just putting this in your system, you can sort of feel the effects. If you do travel to go visit your parents in a different country, you're going to feel the same effects there. And that is something that I don't think exists in the language that we use to talk about business and an ROI and total addressable market. Like, how do you say, like, the world is the return? Like, your return on investment is going to be like for you, for your children, for places in the world that humans
Yeah.
can't still go into, and like that, we don't even know what happens there. And this is like a fundamental thing that is something that we're rallying with, but it's very
Mm-hmm.
interesting to engage in conversations and be allowed to enter these rooms and spaces where we are able to say like maybe we need like a fundamental rethinking of how we quantify these systems
Absolutely.
and it's been just an interesting journey and going through those conversations as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because at the end of the day, it's all well and great, and they're like willing to go for
Yeah.
like a brief stint in our imaginations when I paint the picture and I show them the postcard. I'm like, look at this beautiful thing. And then they're like, so like how much of X does X happen? And I'm just like,
Yeah.
wow. Like I think that there is this like obsession with like quantification
Yeah.
where if you
Mm-hmm.
look at a lot of the communities around the world that are like just doing it, like just regenerating the ecosystems there. They have these nature-based technologies
Yeah.
deployed in their everyday landscapes. They're not looking to quantify. They trust that
They
the
try.
things are happening. And yes, and they do see the benefits. Like there are like longer term benefits. So I think the time scale also of change in terms of like regeneration and rewilding is like way longer. And so people need metrics to justify their spending. And that's totally understandable. Like understand your hands are tied, but I do think that there is a call for like fundamentally rethinking like the capitalistic sort of framework that like underpins climate action. And I think that that's like a huge thing. Like I'm in this class called Reimagining Capitalism and
Here
Reusing
we
Our World, and
go.
I'm like, and we're just talking about this like in circles. You know, I'm sure you've
Yeah,
been in
yeah,
this sort
yeah.
of like space too, Isabel. Like it's it's just like a, oh my God, like we are so stuck in these mental models, and how do we break out of these mental models to kind of think about value not just as money?
Yeah.
And how do you
Yeah.
put time, how do you put sort of like help, and like how do you put these intangibles on the balance sheet? It doesn't go on the balance sheet. It's not meant to be on the balance sheet. It's meant to be
Yeah.
like, it's meant to
Balance.
take
Yeah.
poison out of your environment. Like, that's how can that not be valuable on a balance sheet? And it's like we
Totally.
need to have both the minds, I feel like, to make this
We need
case.
both
But
the minds, and I think there's so many industry, like there's like so many leaders in this space, like Robin Wall Kimmerer and how she talks about like the gift economy, for
Mhm.
example, and just ways of just receiving but also being givers. And this, I don't know, it's just interesting to think about how this is a tension that just continues to grow. But
yeah.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And I think I'm having so many thoughts going off of this, but I think the thing that kind of blew my mind the most when I was learning
Mm.
about it is that capitalism's made up. Like fundamentally, somebody thought of it and thought it was a cool idea. You know? So I think it is possible to rethink it in certain ways. But also when you said like in certain ancient practices, like they don't even quantify things, they just trust it would happen. It made me think of this book I read last year by Namonte Chemo. It has two different titles. I think in the US though it's called We Will Be Jaguars.
Oh.
And she basically says that how her family's tribe, I think they were from Ecuador originally, they lived in the Amazon, they couldn't count past 10. Because why would you need anything past 10? Like, if you collect 10 fish, like, that's loads of fish. If you collected 10 pieces of fruit, that's so much fruit. Anything else is just like a bounty.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's such an interesting concept. I do think we are so driven to quantify things, which I think to a certain extent is really
Mm-hmm.
beneficial because if you're able to quantitate things, you can then add it to the balance sheet,
Yeah,
which so many people and so much
exactly,
of
exactly.
society is.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it is a really interesting thing to be dismantling, I think,
Yeah,
in our minds.
Exactly.
exactly,
In
exactly.
our minds.
So yeah, we are working on
Once,
quantifying our system for the balance sheet, and
yeah.
for the people that for the people that need it. But then it's also been really surprising to us, like how many people, once they understand like what it's
Mm.
doing, they're like happy to kind of engage with the concept. So even though like a lot of the numbers, because the numbers in a lab versus the numbers,
Yeah.
in situ, like you're never going to have like a perfect set of things, which is why at the Terra Carta sort of roundtables they were talking about a lot of discrepancies around carbon accounting, and like how
Mm.
there's like, and like how biodiversity credits are not really like a,
Like a
like
metric.
what are the pitfalls of like trying to tokenize a lot of these things that are incredibly complex.
Mm.
um but how
Mm.
can we begin to understand systems beyond the discrete element that then gets multiplied? Because there's always these sort of properties of emergence that happen in like highly complex systems, that the system is always more than a sum of its parts. Like it's almost always like 1 + 1 is like 5 in like ecology, right? Like because everything working together is not just giving you the benefit of two, but it's giving you the benefit of like multiple different things.
Permutations and
So
combinations. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So
Mhm.
it's that kind of like systems thinking, and like the idea of like the system, a healthy system is always giving so much more benefit than can actually be kind of articulated, because we can't right now even like begin to map. And that's why like I think Manini and I are also thinking a lot about like how are we, what can we know, how can we map, and what are our unknown unknowns that we're trying to like figure out, or like even glean through this like citizen science that we're trying to build out. Like that's like very
Mm.
qualitative, sort of like extremely sort of like in the field looking at things, because there could be interesting outcomes in depending on how we deploy biopods all over the world that could inform our practice. So we're trying to make space for like both data types in like you know in our process, because we do
Exactly.
acknowledge the importance of both. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's sounding more like social life cycle assessment.
Mm.
Yeah, like
Interesting. Yeah.
how do you do that? Like how do you like there's like a,
It's a crazy
Yeah.
field,
Yeah.
that.
That's a
yeah,
crazy
exactly.
concept. And I think it's, yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly. Like there's yesterday I was like doing like a LCA analysis, and then it's all like made up numbers. It's all approximations. Like there was a wooden material that was still carbon negative. I'm just like, what does that mean? Like, why is it
Like,
carbon negative? Wood is not carbon negative. When wood decomposes, it goes back into the
yeah.
soil or into the environment as carbon, or maybe even methane, and that's worse. So it's kind of like a catch-22. It's like it's helpful for certain things, and it does help us make the case for certain technologies, but it's not law. It's not truth. And I think too much people put that idea of like this number is the number, and this is the reality, when it is an approximation of reality. Like inherently it's an approximation of reality. And there's so many other things to the reality and the value of the reality that need to kind of be sort of surfaced, and often are surfaced through other mediums. And I think that's like the great part about being part designer, part engineer, part like now business person, is like you kind of see where the disciplines kind of meet and
Yeah. And
are
sort
like
of like,
not seeing each other. And you're
yeah,
like,
yeah. And
okay, so we
like,
need to just get together and like make it known that all the ways of knowing are interesting and important and have stuff to contribute.
I love that so much. I think they're some of the best disciplines to be involved with. And I feel like we need a part two as well. Like we could just do a whole other
I
podcast
I mean,
know,
just
just
yeah,
talking
looking
I would
at
about
love
that.
to.
some of these systems and metrics, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is amazing. So I'd love to hear kind of as we come to a close, like what's next for you? And obviously you mentioned that you're doing your masters at the moment in part to help build this out. Like how is that going? What's coming next with that kind of program and everything? Manini, do you want to start us off?
Um, I mean, yes, obviously we have our masters to finish. It's like going to be our thesis year next year, and we're really ramping up a lot of this work. I think a big thing for us is just having the time to sit down and do a lot of the complex mapping that we were just discussing, and sort of find the leverage points and sort of just go in directions to help grow our system, but also grow our understanding surrounding the system and maybe other systems that support this system, and things that might be in our blind spots that we're not looking at. And so this is something a lot of which is going to be coming out in the thesis year. And then after that, we are going to be out in the wild with all this time, and we're gonna something that we're actively doing is that we're having like these little nodes and these seeds. And I think something that we want to do is sort of continue doing those and figuring out both the material intelligence at the product scale, but then also like the collective intelligence of all of us being in all of these different locations and all of these different ecologies, and how we can sort of build this way to sort of talk to each other and create knowledge together in really meaningful ways. And so that's something that we're definitely gonna continue doing. And I mean, we always get this question also of like, oh, like, in 50 years, like, are you guys gonna be like the next like blah blah? And we're like, hopefully, by then, hopefully like 50, maybe we shouldn't be a thing anymore, because this will be common practice. And this is a dream that, Avantika and I always have. And it's sort of just like, eventually we won't have to be doing this, because it is going to be how the world works, and this is the kind of respect that we're going to be giving the earth within which we inhabit. So that's sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
short term, long terms. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh,
Very interesting thought.
and I think to supplement a lot of and echo a lot of what Manini was saying is like, this semester we're going to make the case for scaling and business, and we're really trying to like narrow down like where can we as a business, because we are not set up as a nonprofit, we're set up as like sort of a for-profit entity, and like that was consciously done so that we can actually like scale and like take this. So a lot of our learning like this semester is going to be around like kind of
Yeah.
coming up with our strategy around, okay, do you
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
say
no, no,
something?
I was just gonna say just off that, like, a part of having it be nonprofit was sort of conscious that we're sort of entering these rooms where for-profit entities are sort of like not talking about this stuff. And this is like, we just want, I just wanted to say that because it's like this is the way
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
grapple
yeah,
with a lot,
exactly.
as opposed to just flying under the radar and saying we're gonna do this, but we want to reckon with these challenging
Yeah,
conversations.
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Please,
So
I'm sorry I cut you off, please.
no, no, no. That's exactly right. I think when we were, because this could so easily be sort of like social, ecological, nonprofit work. And I think we wanted to have the challenge of like being like, no, actually, we are a venture that we are trying to like grow this as big as we possibly can, and we want to be able to like get like serious dollars and whatever currency, like pounds,
Create
I guess, like behind this.
yeah.
um and like create like an economy around the type of work that we want to do, because why wouldn't we? So this semester is strategy semester, and also like deep learning semester, where we're building some of the tools that are going to help us like create databases of knowledge. And we're
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
happy for people who are excited and contributing to all of this to kind of help facilitate. But so like a knowledge building and tool building and like kind of like strategic plans. And then I think we're seriously going to start looking at, because I think there's a lot of great knowledge, and Manini and I can kind of go down 100 different paths. But I think at the end of our master's thesis, which the master's thesis is going to be like, what is the business plan? What is the manifesto? What are we bringing to the table? What are all of the ways in which we could exist? What are the different ways in this technology could exist? What are the multiple parts? And we're trying to build out almost like a system surrounding BioPod, and really like try and test out as much of it as we can. um, Actively acquire, we're slowly but surely acquiring clients and projects, and we hope that kind of continues this year. And then once we're ready to kind of like launch and just, at the end of our sort of tenure as students and into sort of like working for ourselves as entrepreneurs, I think, even though I think we're still doing that, like I feel like once we end student life and we're kind of in this sort of space, I think it's really going to be about how do we make the biggest splash, and how do we really grow with intention, but also how to, and hopefully school just gives us that thinking time to think through all of the permutations and combinations, and start establishing relationships through our thesis. And then we can this, but also we have a team, and they're like super hungry to grow in a multiple different ways. So hopefully Singapore is going to happen. Hopefully we'll see biopods in Ghana. Hopefully, like, there's a lot of little seeds all over the world. So, we're really excited about this sort of like filamentous growth. But as Manini said, like the long-term goal is to essentially be obsolete, because enough of people have rewilded and remediated through this sort of localized action. And we always say at Biopod, we believe that global change is an emergent outcome of a billion local success stories. And so that's kind of like the vision, is like we want to create as many local success stories as possible to create then global change
Yeah,
in
but
50
not just
years, hopefully.
I love
term. Yeah, yeah.
And I love a quote I got from your website was a world where anyone can heal nature.
Yeah.
How good is that? I love that. Okay, so if anyone wants to get involved, what can they do? Is a newsletter a good way for them to get involved at the moment? Like sign up for updates, like Instagram, like what how can people reach you?
We're definitely on Instagram more often than we should be. And then we have a engage page on our website, and we're looking for folks, as we just said, like if this is something you want to do in your backyard, if this is something you want to do in your hometown, there's like little buttons and little channels through which we can sort of do that. And we do respond to every single email that we do get, even if it's a seed of an idea or if it's something that's super large. And so we do welcome all the energies from all over for wild ideas and anything that can happen. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's Instagram, and then please follow us on Instagram, but also like there's, if you just want to kind of make action in your community, as Manini was mentioning, it's like you can help join a node or start a node in your locality. You can also just, if you want to collaborate, maybe you're a scientist and you want to collaborate on you're working on similar stuff and you want to see how it works out in the real world, like we're happy to work with you to kind of develop like your own sort of version of like a biopod and like kind of integrate your science. If you are a educator and you want to have this type of thinking taught in your sort of classroom or education space, we also do a lot of workshops and are kind of actually trying to build out curriculum around this type of thinking and around biopod. And you can also feel free to reach out to us. And then also, if you want to just sponsor or just like have some biopods for yourself, if you have like a body of water,
Yeah.
or land, or somebody interested, please, definitely there's a sponsor pod section, and we will add you to that sort of like list and kind of like do it on a case by case basis. So there's many different ways.
Incredible. I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And so to round us out, to close us out, Avantika, maybe you could start. Could you please share your one curiosity? And it could be anything. It's basically one thing that you'd like the listener to look more into. It could be a book, a movement, a way of life, something to inspire them.
Oh my God. Wait, this was actually something to inspire them? Uh
Manini can go first
Manini,
if
yeah,
if you
I
want
think
more time
Manini,
Yeah,
to
you go
yeah, of
first.
think.
course. I mean, I feel like just as a person, I'm a person with just like a million curiosities. But I feel like the one thing we actually had to, I read this in undergrad, and we just recently had to reread it for a studio that Avantika and I are taking, but just Ways of Being by James Bridle. And I think it just opens up, and I know that, there's different ways of sort of engaging with this, but it's sort of I would encourage you as a listener to sort of go and think about, the spaces that you inhabit and the other more than human beings that inhabit these spaces with you, and to really consider their ways of thinking, their ways of being, their intelligences, and how they sort of perceive the world. And it sort of builds this empathy for you as yourself, to realize that maybe the human intelligence isn't really, the top of the mountain, for example. But there are other ways of doing it, other intelligences that we can collaborate with. And that is a lot of the work that, grounds what we do at BioPod. It's sort of, we always say that, we're so guided by nature's intelligence, by these multi-species intelligences. And once we do enter these spaces where we're like, you know what, I share this room with all the bacteria, I share my body with all of this like fungi that might be even in me, and they help me digest my food, they help me exist, they help me move around the world. The fundamental way that you put yourself out in your business or in the way that you interact with others is just going to be coming from a place of just so much love and so much gratitude. And so that's definitely a book that I would recommend as a starting point, but it's also a way of thinking that I think is going to shape a lot of climate action for the future.
That sounds amazing. I need to read that. I haven't read it
It's a
Yes.
yet.
great book. Okay, so my curiosity, and is it okay? Okay, I can pick one, but I have like one book and one sort of podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for
So
it. Why not?
the book is Entangled Life by
Yeah.
Merlin Sheldrake. I think that this book is it's like a warm hug. It's kind of like the way he writes, it's basically about mushrooms and fungi
What you're
and
thinking.
kind of showing you how all life is like interconnected, but it goes into such incredible nuance in terms of like, how are mushrooms contributing to all of these functions, but how are they kind of communicating, and it kind of gives you that more than human perspective on life on Earth. And he's an incredible writer. I really enjoy it. It's like reading poetry. So Merlin Sheldrake's
Mm.
Entangled Life is like a must-read book for me, and it's shaped a lot of the way I think. Um, and as a podcast for people that are kind of trying to think more in like the systems level of things, The Great Simplification by Nate Higgins. He talks a lot about sort of the world right now and how he focuses a lot on energy and how we're basically blind to a lot of the energy that we're using and the environmental costs of our entire infrastructure and he just kind of like there's also like a 20-minute YouTube video that's like illustrated, but essentially it's just calling for he thinks that humanity's heading towards like a great simplification, that we have been growing
Mm.
based on ancient sunlight, like energy that was robbed or like is taken from like the past, from literally from the ground, and it makes us think that we can grow at this rate forever. But there is like this sort of like boundary. I think he puts it in like a really interesting story way. And it's a great way to kind of get your head like get a mental picture about like our situation as like a human superorganism
Mm.
on the planet, and how we might what are the lenses to which we maybe should be entertaining some interdisciplinary conversation around systems, and not just looking at things through an economic lens and not just looking at things through like a tech-centered lens, but looking at things through a more holistic systems lens. And I think that really helps people when they're feeling kind of like, oh, like what type of thinking should I kind of like maybe do. Like it's really helped me kind of like conceptualize like the space that I'm in and how I need to be looking at things, because you can't just be one thing if we want to simplify it.
Yeah.
That synergies. need to happen in yourself and in the work that you're doing. And it all needs to come from like all these lenses overlap each other so you can see the picture better so that we're not blind anymore, you know?
100%. Oh, I love ending on that, like interconnected systems. No, I think that's great. Thank you both so much for sharing just your knowledge, your thoughts, your passion, your enthusiasm. I've absolutely loved it, and I love Biopod, and I hope it does so well in the future.
Thank you
Oh,
so much,
thank
Isabel.
you
This
so
was
much.
a treat.
Yes.
I'm so happy to
Thank you
hear.
so, so much. And we're so, so grateful for also what you're doing on the podcast and sort of bringing on these people who are championing the fields of sustainability, whether it's fashion or within the world. And it's just been such a gift to also just have your podcast and the energy that you're putting out into the world. And so we really love being here and we hope we can do it again. And we
Yeah.
hope, stay in touch. But thank you so much.
That's so sweet. Thank you. That means a lot. Yeah, we definitely have to do part two
Yes.
for sure.
Part 2.
All right, until then.
Until then, bye bye. Thank you so much.